The wind howled, it carried a mournful sound. The sound was a whisper, it spoke of a place of shadows and twisted branches. This place was known as the Witch's Forest. Locals spoke of it in hushed tones. Their voices were filled with fear. The forest was alive, but not with the usual creatures. It was alive with a darkness that seeped into your very bones. The trees stood like gnarled claws. They reached towards the sky. Their branches, like skeletal fingers, scraped against each other. The forest whispered. It promised secrets. It promised despair. And those whispers, they lingered long after the wind had died down. The legend was old. It was as old as the town itself. Some dismissed it as a mere story, a way to scare children, but others knew the truth. They knew the darkness that resided in those woods. The legend spoke of a witch. Her heart was as black as the forest's soul. She was said to have lived within the woods. Her laughter echoed through the trees. She had cursed the forest, and she cursed the people in it. They would become the trees. Their agony would fuel her power. She had been gone for years, or so they said. But her presence lingered. It clung to the trees, to the very air itself. The sun was high. 3 friends stood at the edge of town. Tom, the reckless one, Riley, the skeptic, and Bjorn, the quiet observer. They were young, full of life, unaware of the darkness that awaited them.
I dare you. Let's go in.
You know the stories, right? About the witch?
Bjorn said nothing. He simply stared. His eyes were fixed on the path. It was a path that disappeared into the shadows.
Scared?
Tom taunted. He took a step closer to the trees. The shadows seemed to reach for him. Riley lied. He wouldn't back down. Not from a dare. S2 Media Group. 3 young men standing at the edge of a dark forest, one stepping forward. Stock distribute. Equally. No. They walked single file. The path was narrow. Sunlight struggled to pierce the canopy above. The air grew heavy. It was thick with the smell of damp earth and decay. Tom led the way. He walked with false confidence. His bravado was a shield. It hid his growing unease. Riley followed close behind. He scanned the trees. He searched for any sign of danger, any hint of movement. Bjorn brought up the rear. He was quiet, observant. He noticed things the others didn't. The sun was beginning to set. The forest was growing darker. The silence was unnerving. It was a heavy silence, broken only by the sound of their own footsteps and their own breathing.
Did you hear that?
Hear what?
I thought I heard something breathing.
They stood there listening. The silence pressed in on them. It was the silence of something watching, something waiting. They pressed on, deeper into the forest's grasp. The light dwindled with every step. Shadows stretched, long and skeletal, from the base of ancient trees. Tom's bravado was beginning to falter. His earlier confidence now seemed foolish.
It's just the wind and the trees.
But his words lacked conviction. They offered little comfort in the face of the forest's growing oppression. Bjorn, ever observant, noticed the change in his friends, their forced smiles, their quickened breaths, the way their eyes darted about. He felt it too, the wrongness of the place. A sudden gust of wind swept through the trees, carrying with it a chorus of whispers. They were faint, almost indistinguishable, yet they sent chills down their spines.
Did you hear that? They're talking about us.
It's nothing, Tom, just the wind playing tricks on us.
But even as he spoke, he couldn't shake the feeling that the whispers held meaning. The wind died down as quickly as it had risen, leaving an eerie silence in its wake. The whispers faded into the rustle of leaves, leaving behind a lingering sense of dread. As twilight descended, casting the forest in an ethereal glow, they stumbled upon a small clearing. In the center stood a gnarled oak, its branches twisted and contorted like the limbs of a tormented beast. It was unnaturally large, dwarfing the surrounding trees.
We should head back, it'll be dark soon.
Riley's voice was tight with apprehension. He couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. As if in answer, a pair of eyes flickered open within the hollow of the ancient oak. They glowed with an unnatural light, a piercing yellow that seemed to cut through the growing darkness. For a moment, the three friends stood frozen, their gazes locked on the luminous orbs. Bjorn, drawn by a morbid curiosity, took a tentative step forward. He couldn't tear his gaze away from the eyes, their glow hypnotic and terrifying. As he drew closer, he noticed something else, something that sent a shiver down his spine. The bark of the oak, gnarled and rough, seemed to shift and contort around the glowing eyes. It twisted and flowed, forming features, a grotesque mockery of a human face, a mouth, lipless and wide, stretched into a silent scream, revealing rows of jagged bark-like teeth.
We need to get out of here, now.
Panic seized them. They ran. Branches whipped at their faces, thorns tore at their clothes. The forest seemed to twist around them. It was a labyrinth with no escape. The ground beneath their feet was uneven. Roots snaked out like serpents. They tripped and stumbled. They couldn't stop. Not now. The fear was a living thing. It propelled them forward. Tom, his breath ragged, glanced over his shoulder. The trees seemed to be closing in, their branches intertwined above. They formed a suffocating canopy. The light was fading fast. Riley pushed through a thicket. He gasped for air. His lungs burned. He could hear his own heartbeat in his ears. It was a frantic drumbeat. Bjorn, always the most observant, noticed something strange.
He stopped.
His friends, caught in their own terror, didn't notice. They crashed on, deeper into the darkening woods. Bjorn stared at the trees, his blood running cold.
He saw them now. The faces. They were everywhere. Twisted and gnarled, frozen in expressions of agony and despair. Eyes peered out from knotholes. Mouths gaped open in silent screams.
He recognized one face, a farmer he'd seen in town. Another face, a young woman who sold flowers in the market. Their faces were contorted, trapped within the bark.
His breath caught in his throat. He understood. These weren't just trees. They were people. People who had been consumed by the forest.
But his friends were gone, swallowed by the deepening shadows. He was alone, surrounded by the silent screams of the damned.
Panic threatened to overwhelm him. He had to get out. Now.
He turned to run, but a wall of thorns blocked his path. Their points glinted wickedly in the fading light. He tried another path and another. Each time, the thorns barred his way.
He was trapped, a prisoner in the witch's macabre garden. Despair washed over him. He sank to his knees. The faces in the trees seemed to mock him. Their silent screams echoed his own growing terror.
A twig snapped. He looked up. A figure stood at the edge of the clearing. It was a woman, old and haggard. Her eyes glowed with an unnatural light.
She smiled. It wasn't a pleasant smile. It was cold, cruel. It spoke of ancient power and unspeakable evil. "Lost, little one?" she rasped. Her voice was like dry leaves skittering across dead ground.
He tried to speak, but no words came out, only a strangled gasp. The woman glided towards him. Her movements were unnervingly fluid, as if she were one with the forest itself.
She stopped in front of him. She reached out a withered hand. Her touch was ice cold. It burned like fire.
He screamed, but the sound was swallowed by the trees. The witch's laughter echoed through the trees. It was a chilling sound, hollow and devoid of mirth. It spoke of a darkness that ran deeper than the forest itself.
Struggling. Her grip, it's ironclad.
Bjorn struggled against her grasp, but it was no use. His fear was a living thing. It pulsed within him.
"Foolish mortals, you dare trespass on my domain. This forest is mine. Its secrets are not for your eyes."
Tom and Riley burst into the clearing, their faces a mixture of terror and determination. They had heard Bjorn scream, had fought their way back through the twisting paths of the cursed woods. But they were too late. The witch held Bjorn captive, her grip on his arm like a vice.
Let him go.
"You cannot defy me. This forest is my domain, and its curse will consume you all."
What curse?
Riley gasped, his voice trembling with a fear he couldn't suppress. He stood at the edge of the clearing, torn between the urge to flee and the desperate need to help his friend. The witch gestured towards the surrounding trees, their gnarled branches twisting and contorting as if in answer to her summons.
"These trees were once mortals, just like you. They dared to defy me, to trespass on my sacred ground."
The witch pointed a gnarled finger at a nearby tree, its branches twisting and contorting as if in agony.
"I transformed them, trapped their souls within these wooden prisons. Their agony sustains me. Their suffering fuels my power."
"There is a way to break the curse," a voice whispered. The voice was faint, barely audible, yet it seemed to echo deep within their minds. The witch stiffened, her eyes darting around the clearing, searching for the source of the voice.
"Who speaks?"
She hissed, her voice laced with a rare flicker of uncertainty. The voice grew stronger, emanating from the ancient oak at the heart of the clearing. It was ancient, filled with a sorrow that stretched back centuries. A heavy silence descended upon the clearing. The three friends stared at the ancient oak, their faces pale with a mixture of hope and dread. The witch's laughter had died down, replaced by a low growl of frustration and anger.
She tugged at Bjorn's arm, pulling him close, her glowing eyes boring into his. "Don't listen to it," she hissed, her voice a venomous whisper in his ear. "It lies. There is no escape from my curse."
But Bjorn could feel the ancient power emanating from the oak tree. He looked at his friends, their faces etched with fear and uncertainty. and he knew what he had to do.
I'll do it, he whispered, his voice surprisingly steady. I'll become the guardian.
Bjorn stood his ground, his gaze unwavering as the witch bore down on him. Fear still gnawed at his insides, but it was eclipsed by a strange sense of purpose. He understood now. The whispers, the faces in the trees, the ancient oak's pronouncements. They had led him to this moment, this sacrifice.
No! Tom screamed, lunging forward.
But Riley held him back, his own face a mask of anguish and understanding. This was a path they couldn't follow. This was Bjorn's fate. As the witch reached for him, her fingers like twisted claws, Bjorn closed his eyes and embraced the ancient oak. He felt a jolt of energy, raw and untamed, surge through him. It was a symphony of whispers, of sorrow and hope, of centuries of suffering and resilience. The forest held its breath. The witch froze, her triumph stalled, replaced by a flicker of doubt in her ancient eyes. This wasn't how it was supposed to be. She drew back her hand, her voice a mix of fury and confusion.
What have you done?
Light exploded outward, blinding and powerful. The ancient oak groaned, its branches reaching skyward as if in ecstatic pain. Bjorn's scream echoed through the trees, a sound both agonizing and strangely beautiful. Tom and Riley shielded their eyes from the blinding light. The air crackled with energy, the very ground beneath their feet vibrating with a newfound power. The forest, once silent and oppressive, was alive with sound.
Leaves rustled not with the wind, but with purpose. Branches intertwined, forming a canopy above them that shimmered with an otherworldly luminescence. The faces within the trees, once frozen in expressions of agony, now seemed to soften, their features calming as if a great weight had been lifted.
The whispers returned, but they were different now. No longer filled with sorrow and pain, but with gratitude and peace. The forest was thanking Bjorn, acknowledging his sacrifice. He was one with them now, the guardian of their souls. Riley looked at the spot where Bjorn had stood, now empty, and felt a pang of sorrow mixed with a strange sense of relief. His friend was gone, but he was also everywhere. He was the forest, and the forest was him. The light faded, the witch was gone, vanished without a trace. The forest stood silent once more, but it was a different kind of silence now, peaceful, serene. The curse was broken. Tom and Riley, shaken but alive, stumbled out of the woods. They carried with them a tale they knew few would believe. A tale of cursed trees, of a witch's wrath, and a sacrifice that had redeemed a forest.
As they walked away, the first stars began to appear in the night sky. And if they listened closely, very closely, they could hear it. The faint whisper of Bjorn's voice carried on the wind, woven into the fabric of the forest he now protected.
The witch's forest remained, a place of shadows and secrets, but it was no longer a place of fear. It was a place of peace, a place where the souls of the lost found solace in the embrace of the trees, a place where the witching hour held no power, for the guardian watched over them all. And sometimes, when the wind was just right, they could swear they heard Bjorn's laughter echoing through the trees.